I am ready. Go ahead and click start.
Started.
We have a special agenda here. I'm sorry, I don't have the agenda.
Yeah, that's all right. The first would
go
just
ahead.
be, we're going to talk about legislative updates.
Okay.
And so I'm going to really ask Chris and Rusty just to chime in on kind of what are some of the hot updates right now? And then we'll shift into kind of the position and the platform.
Yeah, thanks committee members for agreeing to this special meeting because there was this topic that came up that we're going to discuss in a little bit that is COVID related, and I felt this shouldn't wait until our regularly scheduled. And then so I asked John, but a reward for doing this today is that we'll cancel the next meeting.
So the other meeting that was previously scheduled in September we're going to cancel that. And then we'll move
unless something else comes up.
Yeah.
So we're going to go with the 8th, the 12th, and the 10th for the next 3 months like we...
We won't have the September meeting, so whichever dates you're referring to.
October 8th, okay. Okay.
Great.
So go ahead and take it away.
Appreciate the time back. I can give just a brief, and Chris can color in if he wants to. Obviously, the state legislature did the heavy lifting on the education budget prior to that. So, but September really is about getting the rest of the state budget done. They've divided it up. They're going to do the state budget in September, given their October 1 deadline for the new fiscal year. And then they'll look at October, November, and December for ARP funding discussions for the federal funds that come through. And there will be a larger discussion on that. My understanding is that a number of the budgets have already been negotiated between the House, the Senate, and the administration, which is a great sign that they're negotiating together. I don't foresee any reasons why 90% of the budget shouldn't be done by the third week in September, which is a good sign. I think there are a couple of outstanding issues that may be a little harder. The biggest one I think would be higher ed and community colleges. There was a proposal by the House to really take some of the lower funded ones and move them up. And then that, of course, has a cost to the higher funded institutions. And so there's a fight about resources. So that may take a little longer than others. And there's some programs, Futures for Frontliners, some of the Going Pro, Reconnect, those kind of things, I think are negotiations between the administration and the legislature. Those are sort of at the highest levels. But that is, I think, the predominant thing that will happen in September in terms of the legislature. So, Chris, I don't know if that...
No, that certainly covers it. What I would say, given the fact that we have the budget done, one of the shortcomings of the legislative proposal that passed in late June was it didn't account for the fact we may have an additional surge with COVID. And therefore, we reverted back to all of the traditional seat time rules. All the flexibility that was granted for last year no longer is in state statute. And therefore, if we do have a situation where there is an outbreak or a number of students who have to be quarantined, it's going to be difficult for us to maintain and count that as a day of instruction for funding purposes under these laws. And so we're working not only with the department to see what rules they may be able to adjust internally under their purview, but also making sure we're pursuing a legislative solution in case that does not grant the flexibility we need. For us, it's about, and what we've always discussed, preparedness. If we have the rules in place and our systems can know what the rules are going to be, they can plan and prepare for if these situations arise, we can execute plans. Now we're a little bit behind the 8 ball because the school year has already started, and we have to wait for this to move through not only the department process, but the legislative process. We've already seen situations across the state, not only with heat days, to where districts have had to shorten their days of instruction, but we've also seen situations where there have been outbreaks and they've had to cancel school. And so if you think about it in context, our only outlet right now is the 6 forgiven days, your traditional snow days, plus the district can apply for an additional 3 days to the state superintendent. In many cases, that's not going to be adequate. And so how do we find this path to where we can chart it forward to where kids can still learn remotely if school is closed due to an outbreak or quarantine, and the district can still get the funding, and so their education is less disrupted as we move through this year. So I think that's going to be a significant part of the work that happens early this fall. In addition, it's going to be working with the Department of Education to make sure the federal resources are flowing and those investments can be made within programming.
So, should we go ahead and then just have this conversation, or should, are there
I mean,
any
that's
updates?
probably the majority of the updates that we have right now, right? I don't-
Yep.
You know, the only thing I just would reiterate is this was the best state budget we've had ever.
Yeah.
And now we're reaching the point where now there is no inequity between the highest funded and lowest funded. There's a base foundation allowance. And so we've been fighting to get to this point as long as I've been employed in this district. And now when we talk about equity and funding is going to be an opportunity for us to really ramp up our advocacy efforts. And I'll talk more about that when we get to kind of the legislative platform discussion. But Chris really teed it up. You know, this is, right now, GRPS is fortunate that we have not had any significant outbreaks. We haven't had to close schools. We have had to quarantine a couple classes though. And so if that's a trend, which, you know, you're seeing whole school districts that had to shut down because their attendance rate was below 75%.
May I ask, John, you said you had to quarantine a couple of classrooms.
That's correct.
So did you send the kids home for their quarantine? And
That's correct.
Okay, so the teachers and the kids.
It depends on the situation. It may not have been the teacher, depends if the teacher, there's a lot of X factors that go into it.
Okay.
But we have had a couple situations where we've had to quarantine classrooms.
And they stay away 10 days?
10 days. Yep. And it could be up to 20 days depending on, because what happens is if you're a close contact and then maybe 3 days later you get it, that restarts the clock. And so that's the part why we need this flexibility. And that's why we're asking you to take a position today so that we can begin work on it. You know, I think there's enough in your past legislative platforms that probably gives us some degree of flexibility, but I could not find anything specific to seat time waivers related to a pandemic.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. Ironically, we did not anticipate this. That's 5 years ago. Let me just give some context too on Chris and John and I have been thinking about all of the different ways that you can attack this problem. You know, there are a myriad of solutions that you could go at. You could just get a sort of a waiving of the seat time rules sort of completely. There seems to be a pushback among the legislature in that what is the accountability so that we're just not canceling for, you know, there should be a high bar for cancellation. And what is the ability to teach remotely for those kids that aren't in, and what counts as remote and what doesn't, right? And so no different questions than we asked last year. It's just, what do you do? And so, you know, Chris and John and I have had lots of discussions with even some other non-traditional allies in the school community about how we can be together in pushing something. For instance, you know, could you add snow days and just sort of do it that way, right? What is a simple way down to just giving the superintendent of instruction more ability to have flexibility to do something. So it sort of runs the gamut. This is a lot like throwing spaghetti up against the wall and see what might stick and get some momentum. I will tell you that there has been some movement, I think, on the Senate side to look at this issue and try to craft a solution. I think there has been less conversation on the House side and less willingness to do it. Is it?
And a complicating factor to all of this, when you think about masking in particular, it really changes the close contact definition.
Yep.
And when you have two individuals who are properly wearing masks, you have between that 3 to 6 foot area to where no longer, if somebody is a positive case, does the other one have to sit out. And so that really reduces the quarantine. So in an interesting way, we have this masking debate playing out in many communities across the state, which has its own political undertones. However, what I think also plays into this is that when we do have two individuals masked, the CDC and the Kent County Health Department are indicating we can keep more people in school. And so that's a dynamic of this that I think is worth mentioning as well. And a reason why the masking policies, for the most part, do support keeping kids in school, in-person instruction.
So, but that sounds like a different conversation though, in terms of policies directed towards what to do in quarantining decisions, which is separate from what to do once a student is quarantined or a school is quarantined, right?
That's true. That's accurate. If
Yeah.
anything, Chris is, I think, reinforcing that the mask mandate, and for us, to our mandate for pre-K-12 should help to limit the number of students who are going to be quarantined.
Right.
Because previously, when there was a close contact, they were all out. Now, if you're properly masked and or vaccinated, you may not need to be quarantined.
But
So the
that
hope
would
is
influence
that
our decision to quarantine, not what we do once the student is quarantined, right?
that's correct. And what with this position, we're asking you to simply essentially authorize us to seek legislative or even potentially executive solutions to provide maximum flexibility on seat time and instructional hours in the event there is a closure of a school or there's quarantine where we're not hitting the 75% daily attendance, may not hit the 180 days of instruction or the 1098 hours of instruction. And so it's as simple as, and I put it on, is that Grand Rapids Board of Education is seeking adjustments to allow for remote learning in instances where outbreaks occur at schools or students are being quarantined. That's all we need. That would give us the direction to go forward and seek what we can get.
Maybe this is a job, well, I guess for both Chris and Rusty, but 2 years ago, with the winter that we had in much of the state, I mean, I know in the Mecosta County area where Ferris is located, students missed over 20 days of school and they had to go. To me, it seems like what we learned from the pandemic was the possibility of ending snow days, right? Ending the need for snow days if we could implement remote instruction. Could this be the beginning of a conversation of that, where especially if more rural districts are more reluctant to support this kind of thing, to kind of get them to a place where they can actually, on more regular basis, implement remote learning when needed?
Yeah, I mean, Chris, you know the details better than I would, but right now, there would be no flexibility in the current law if there was a snow day to be able to do remote learning and not count it as a snow day, correct? Yeah.
That's also included in the collective bargaining agreements too. So that there's more to the snow day solution. So
Theoretically, yes, it can,
Yeah.
it can move in that direction, but the policy, the statute as written wouldn't allow for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously for this situation, we need to focus on the pandemic and the interests of people to move towards emergency solutions. But in the long term, we should be finding ways to provide instruction to students regardless, and especially as we invest more in access to Wi-Fi and fiber optics and stuff like that. So, because I know that there are some rural districts that are already out, as you were mentioning, Chris, that that they're already not even a week into school having to close schools.
Well, we haven't even gotten to cold weather yet.
Right. I mean, this is just like, and this isn't because of heat or anything. This is just that there's already too many kids that are sick.
I know that Dr. Gorman and the academic team are already working on kind of solutions because right now it's kind of treated like a normal sick day. The teacher's supposed to post assignments to the learning management system to kind of keep the kid up. But if we know that if it's beyond 10 days, we've got to look at what remote learning options are available. So we're already trying to figure out how we would implement and support the students, even though we don't currently have the flexibility. And we've got to keep teaching and learning going.
Well, and that gets to the point that's also driving this is this sense that we're not going to do our work unless there's some measure of accountability.
Right.
And that we're not going to try to educate children regardless of the conditions of the situation. And so, obviously, I guess you can't legislate their attitude that school districts aren't interested in doing their job, but there can be other ways. It's just like the same thing with third grade reading. There's other ways to hold teachers and learning accountable, than protect them. And it's not that we don't, not like we're asking to absolve accountability. So So anyway, do you need an action
We
by
need
the
you
three of
to
us?
take an action, so we'd need a motion.
So can you read that again?
Sure. Grand Rapids Board of Education is seeking adjustments to, or is advocating for adjustments to the law allowing for remote learning in instances where outbreaks occur at schools or students are being quarantined.
Can I get a motion to support that?
So moved.
Support.
All in favor, say aye.
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 So this will move to the full board on Tuesday?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I will, and I'll make sure we write it up and that it's in the packet, right?
Okay, all right.
All right, the next part is really just a discussion item about our, kind of the plans for our legislative platform. You might recall, and I had included this in the email to you, so Kim, if you have access to your email, it's in there, but I'll read. We had developed a COVID-specific legislative platform last year that were COVID-related legislative priorities. One was equitable and adequate funding to meet student needs and address COVID learning loss. Teacher and administrator evaluation, needing to temporarily suspend. The critical shortage list, the read by grade 3 law suspension or extension, and then the substitute teacher pool expansion. Obviously, a lot of this is not as relevant as it was, and so I wanted to have a discussion at things that I think we need to look at for your platform. And of course, for the next meeting, we'll bring a draft to you for your review and for a vote. But started out, obviously, the flexibility on seat time, the one you just passed, I think that'll be number one. Flexibility with ESSER funds, I think that's something that we are increasingly concerned about the level of reporting requirements and some of the limitations and all the hoops that we're having to jump through to make sure these dollars are getting in to support
The
students.
millions and millions of dollars that the state has, and yet we're still evicting people. That money is still not keeping people in their homes. Today I heard on NPR that, I mean, it's just incredible the amount that the state is sitting on, and here we have people getting kicked out of their homes. What?
Talent retention recruitment there has to be a statewide strategy and more intentionality, and we'll flush out what that could look like a little further. The equity funding, this would be now that we've received the base per pupil foundation allowance, now's the time to start to build an equitable funding formula, regardless of ESSER funds. This is as if we are only focused in on the state school aid fund. And
So
then
this
the other,
would be similar to the previous number one, establish a needs-based state funding.
exactly. In fact, that will probably stay very similar. We're just going to tweak it a little bit.
Okay.
And then the one that the mayor has actually expressed an interest in working with us on is the Headley Rollback. One of our original platforms, literally dating back to when I started here 14 years ago, was to eliminate this legislation where you have a Headley we want to exempt from Headley rollback the local 18 mil levy required for proposal A. That's the reason why we had to go back out with our non-homestead millage recently. Granted, it passed by 70%, which is what it's basically consistently passed by for 2 decades. But it's confusing. Voters it's not, even the most educated voter calls and says, I've got 3 master's degrees and I cannot understand what this is. This makes no sense to me. And so I think both my colleagues here know that this is probably a heavy legislative lift, but we want to put more of a spotlight on it now because it's also costly. In this case, we had to pay for the election. So it's costing taxpayers for the election. It creates confusion amongst the electorate, and it's kind of become functional. It's kind of obsolete. Voters consistently in all 550 school districts put these up, and they pass usually by pretty large margins, unless you're like Saugatuck, where it failed and it almost bankrupted the district. They literally had to take loan out to meet payroll until they could get it back on the ballot and then do an education campaign to explain why the voters needed to.
Yeah, especially when the state expects you to do it, so.
That's right.
It's not like
Anything else you want to add on that? You're deeper than.
Well, I would just add, I think there's an opportunity also to work with clerks. Clerks have been trying to streamline processes and to make sure that we don't have extensive ballots or long ballots where it's not necessary. So I think there's opportunity working with clerks. But when you look at the funding structure of the state of Michigan, the state assumes you collect that full 18 mills.
Right.
And so the rollback issue comes just because you have economic growth within your community, and then it would exceed that 18 mil collection, and therefore it rolls it back. And the state doesn't factor that in when they're giving you funding from the school aid fund at the state level. So making this change effectively would make it so that that 18 mil is in perpetuity, it's collected, and then there's none of this back and forth where you got to levy more than 18 mils and there's confusion among the voter ranks. Because that's really where you get to the lack of trust in government too. Yep. Wait, you're telling me you're going to collect 18 mils, but it says on the ballot you're collecting 20? It doesn't make sense to me. But it's just the way
I
that
already gave you 18,
we're structured.
now you want 22.
Yeah.
This is Kim Williams. Question about what exactly would be our strategy to go forward with trying to get, the support to change this this legislation.
Sophisticated begging. As John said, it
Is that what you call your profession?
Yeah, I won't. Yeah, well, sometimes it's called something different, but I won't repeat that in a public meeting. Kim, it really is trying to. I think John pointed out, trying to put a spotlight on this and really educating the legislature at a time when you're not dealing with 15 other education items. You can sort of highlight this, and I think that education piece. For example, as we look to board capital days and having legislators in for a luncheon and things like that as we can, or a Zoom luncheon, that this be a highlight that we talk about as to why it's important and really educate. Because I think most of the legislators would be like, really? And not necessarily understand it. So I think it's partly a focus by the board on making this a priority, and secondarily educating those legislators that it is an issue.
Well, it sounds like the clerk.
Yeah, to
idea
Chris's
is
point,
yeah.
The great thing is Joel Hondorp, who's the Grand Rapids City Clerk, and Lisa Postumus Lyons, who's a Republican clerk at the Kent County. We've got a great relationship. They would likely join us in something like this.
Mm-hmm.
I know Joel would for sure, and he's a former Republican staffer. So, there's a case to be made. And again, sometimes it takes 14 years before you get that passed. So we may not get this accomplished in a Republican-controlled House and Senate, but if it's, lightning can strike, and maybe by us putting the spotlight on it, that will give it the momentum that it needs. Especially if you can we can tee it up in a way that's appealing and understanding to lawmakers in both chambers.
Yeah, you have to take the long view. I wouldn't go to the legislature right now and ask for this, given all the masks, fights, and everything that's going on. Now's not the time. But if we begin to educate and just talk about it without proposing that and asking them to do something directly on it, we just educate for a while. I think that's a good strategy.
Kim Williams again. Question: are we also seeking support through other districts to, take the same approach?
Yep, the West Michigan Talent Triangle. Correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry, here I'm going to hand this to you. You got a new name now.
Yeah, with our regional partnership between the school districts in Ottawa, Kent, and Muskegon counties, there's universal support for going this direction. And I think you'd also see universal support from our statewide education associations. At the end of the day, what we're looking for is resources to educate kids. These ballot questions are, as John said, obsolete in a sense, right? They're taking time and resources away from the work that we do in order to do something that is seemingly an automatic approval from the voters. And the bizarre thing about it is we're asking the voters to vote for really what are tax parcels that are non-homestead, right? It's not residencies. Mm-hmm. And so it's this, I think what it ends up being, Kim, is a fallout from just proposal A. And when we tried to push everything together and make it work, there are some things that are just strange. And people largely have just ignored it. And I think it is one of those tax policy areas that, if given the time and attention and clarity, it can be cleaned up and it would free up some time and some resources for school districts all across the state.
So those kind of are the leading issues that I envision. Is there anything else, Chris or Rusty, you think we should include as part of our priorities this year? Is there something I'm missing at all?
Oh, I have something that I'm really concerned about. What are we going to do about voting rights? I mean, I was told that voting rights not an educational issue. Well, as far as I'm concerned, if we eliminate people from the polls who have brown skin and they never get to select these people who make decisions about us and our schools and everything else, nothing is ever going to change. And I feel so strongly, I mean, these voting rights, anti-voting, the bill they passed in Texas and that they're passing all over the country. And I spoke with Winnie Brinks the other day, and she said there are things out there. And I mean, I just don't think that as a school district or as educators, we can let this happen to our people. You know, our district is, you know, is a brown district. And more than anything, you know that it's directed against those people because those are the people who, you know, might vote for something in their own best interest that the people who don't want them to vote are, you know, they don't want them to vote because they might support somebody who's going to look out for them. And I am just furious when I listen to the news, and when I talked to Winnie the other morning, she says, it's out there, it's coming. I just feel it is an educational issue. I don't think we can ignore this.
Rusty?
Yeah, I mean, that, obviously, if the board, you know, wants to sort of wade into those waters, you know, certainly we can advise and assist in sort of making our opinions known. I will tell you that there is a lot going on in regards to elections and voting. Michigan is different than other states in that you have divided government.
You have a Democrat who could.
And
how long will she last? And they'll shove it through the next time.
Yep,
That's-
no, yep, completely. And you may or may not have seen that there is a proposal for an initiated law that would make some changes to the legislation that would essentially, or to state law regarding elections that would essentially bypass the governor. Because
Eliminate her
well, that
ability.
seems fair,
Would,
sure.
Wouldn't it eliminate her ability to veto it, or is that what it was?
yeah,
or-
so when you do an initiated law, if you get a certain amount of signatures, it then only goes to the legislature, who can then approve it, and it becomes law. It's been used by sort of both sides sporadically over the years to do right to work. It was done, and then also minimum wage. It was done. So that process is out there right now. I'm told that because of that ballot initiative, the likelihood is that the big push for any legislation would be stuff that would be agreed to by both sides, something that the governor would sign. There'd be exceptions to that, of course, for political reasons. But it is something that is out there. I've never seen in my time when election issues come up, the business community come out so strongly and saying, hang on, you know, let's make sure that what we do is bipartisan. There's a big push by a
So
number
that
of...
is happening on the state level, that, okay.
Business community is pushing back against some of these
Good,
proposals. Is that
good.
right?
Yeah, I would just say it this way. I think they're trying to be careful. You know, what's the old Michael Jordan line? Republicans buy shoes too. And so there's this push to say, whatever you do, do it in a bipartisan fashion, so that you're not moving the pendulum too far one way or the other. That you're doing incremental change that also gives people confidence in elections. So that is a different dynamic than I've ever seen before, and so it feels like there is some greater degree of check and balance than you might have seen 5 years ago. So.
My sense of, and this is more of a broad statement, not specifically regarding the years, is that I see that first of all, we have had legislation that might seemingly not be connected to the schools come before us that we've chosen to support. We've chosen to support and advocate for driver licenses for all. We've had, so we've had requests, Elliott Larson Act. And I think that it's, rather than us looking at things that need to be fixed and asking it, we've been asked to sign on to legislation, so perhaps this would be something. I also see that what we are trying to do is to get resources for Grand Rapids Public School students with the legislature that we have. And that legislature is one that is making decisions on other things too. And about
And
what
then, if they get their way and they can pass these restrictive voting laws, they can get those people out that might support some rational bipartisan approach. But, yeah, I just think this is bottom line as far as education is concerned. I might be a voice calling in the wilderness, but it won't be the first time it's happened.
Well, I certainly agree with everything you're saying. My sense is, and that we could discuss it as a full board, is that that the board is asking for what we need for the schools with the current legislature to get what we need from the schools. But secondly, I think that we could also ask, Rusty's team to find legislation that supports.
I was going to suggest that maybe if you're willing,
Yeah.
let us huddle on it. Let us come
Yeah.
to your next board meeting with maybe some suggestions.
Yeah.
Advocating for voting rights is, that's a civic duty, and that seems in line with what we do to encourage kids to register to vote and to get out and vote. Not just kids, but families. So it's like you said, Dr. Baker. It's not like this board hasn't taken positions that maybe weren't exclusive to public education. So let us come back to you with something in October.
And I would add, you're able to, in those situations, those issues didn't necessarily make a legislative priority list, but they were a statement of the board at the time when it was a germane issue before the legislature, to where you also could make thoughts and positions known. So I think what I would say is, don't feel like this is your only opportunity as a board in which you're able to weigh in on public policy issues. What this is, typically, is a document that's reflective of the priorities that the educational institution has to advance the mission. And it's more focused on what are those specific things that are education related. But that doesn't preclude any board or at any time taking a look at other issues and making their thoughts known. So.
And just to put a point on it, I would just suggest that in these kinds of issues, oftentimes you can develop a list of principles that you would want any legislation dealing with voting rights to deal with or to reflect in those values that the district or the board has that are consistent with encouraging people to vote and that kind of thing. And in that way, you get into an issue where you can vet laws, bills that come through and go, do they meet our values? And if they don't, then we can't support them. And if they do, then we can support them. And so oftentimes, and I think that's a lot of what the business
that's a good
community
way.
did, they sort of established those principles. It's got to look like this and reflect our values in order for it to be pushed. And it really, what it does is it gets you out of the political theater game of being used either way in the debate in a way that you don't want to be, right? And so, we can sort of look through that, but I think there is a way to, what's the Aerosmith song, Tap Dancing on a Landmine? There's a way to sort of do that in a way that is strong and about your opinions, but doesn't get you in a bind, to your point, about what we're trying to accomplish on other things. So I think there's a way to navigate it if the board chooses to move in that direction.
Let it be known.
This is Kim Williams.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kim.
I would actually really support that if you could put something together in that regard. I agree that, maybe we don't want to tap dance on a landmine, but I do believe as a part of our values and the community we serve that we should be taking some kind of a stance in that regard. So I agree with you, Kathy. Thank you very much for bringing that up.
I'll use an example. One of your old platforms, the one that was like the 12-page platform, you had a guiding principle that says maintain local democratic control consistent with the Constitution, state law, and core democratic principles. not that that gives the full coverage, but you're starting to imply, well, voting is a core democratic principle.
Small d.
Small d, right? So we'll come back in October with a draft legislative priority list with thoughts and recommendations on the voting issues. And then by that point, we should also have at least plans for our legislative lunch, which is what we typically do in November. We'll have to determine if we're going to try to do it in person or virtual. I think if we do it at the university and we spread us all out, it wouldn't be.
John, may I ask you then, I know I talked to Tony and then you replied about this legislative committee that's being set up for the MASB, and
Oh, yeah.
they're going to have people there 8:15 to 1:30 and chance to meet our own legislators and so on. It is a cost, but I mean, are you saying that what we're going to do personally, I mean, as far as Grand Rapids Public, it takes
Yeah.
the place of this?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
We hold it on our ground.
Okay,
It's
that's
specific
fine.
to
I just wanted to
GRPS.
understand, yeah.
Yeah, as I think I said, I mean, that's being involved with any of the state associations like MASB. As board members, you're welcome and encouraged to do that. We work closely with the state associations, but then we also kind of do things the GRPS way sometimes, and in partnership with Chris and his group.
Well, that's fine. I
So
just
it's
wanted to make
a little
sure.
both and, but in this case, this would be inviting our West Michigan delegation and state and House, Senate and House members from the entire region, not just Rachel, David,
Yeah.
and Winnie. And so our goal is to continue to build that relationship and be a go-to source for our West Michigan delegation.
Do you have a date for that?
Not yet.
Okay.
We will work on that and make sure, and we'll circulate it around you, make sure it works for you all in your calendars. But we typically do it on a Monday or a Friday, and we'll get those details and we'll bring that to you all in October.
Okay.
Yeah, and one other thing, going back to the conversation about the voting rights, I think that I like the statement of principles. I think that we probably, without going through the time to create a new statement of principles, our equity policy is,
Yeah.
pretty strong. And so we could just, implement, we could just like state, according to our equity policy, these are what the district values, and that includes, adequate access to the ballot box, et cetera. So, and then we can actually probably more quickly implement it in our principles rather than going through another process of creating a new set of principles that would take, several meetings.
Great. I think that's all we have then.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks for tuning in virtually.
Okay, Tony, do we need to put the accommodation on the record?
Oh,
We received something that we're supposed to put on the record why I am not in person.
Do we have,
I'm not sure. Sorry, if Julie sent it, I don't.
Okay, well, I'll just read it real quick, just.
Oh, yeah, you got it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks, Kim.
Board members, please have the minutes reflect that I am attending today's meeting remotely due to a medical condition. I am currently located in Kent County, Michigan, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and any public attending the meeting electronically will be able to provide public comment in the manner outlined on the meeting notice.
So that is the rule that,
Yeah, and the
No.
vote should probably reflect a 2-0.
I think that's correct. but
Yeah,
I want
a
to check
2-0,
with
not a
Julie.
3-0. Yep,
then I seconded her,
right.
Her. Kathy?
yes, I
So the
seconded.
motion was seconded, was made by Kathy and
And
seconded by
Seconded by
Dr.
me
Baker.
rather than
Yep.
Kim.
Okay, good
Yep.
call. Thanks, Kim. Thank you
Right.
for
All righty.
catching that.